Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. My name is 4AS, and this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. This is also my co-host, Mr. E. Mr. E, how are you going today?
Very well, 4AS. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. And we have another guest today, friend of the podcast, Kareem, who is is an org psych. So, Kareem, how
Awesome.
are you going today?
Good days, good days. Thrilled to be here and have some juicy conversations.
The thing is, a lot of people know about clinical psychologists, and all of that, but like, I don't think many people would know what an organizational psychologist is.
Yes,
Maybe as a
please
yeah, maybe as a
divulge.
exactly. So maybe as a first port of call, what is an org psych?
Sure, sure. I should probably start by saying that I'm currently studying Masters of Organizational Psychology, so technically I'm not allowed to use the title of psychologist just yet.
Right.
Huge disclaimer.
We won't hold it against you, we swear.
But I've been at it for a little while and picked up a few things along the way, so let me have a crack at trying to explain what org psychs do. So basically, org psych is meant to be anything to do with psychology in the workplace.
Right.
So there is some mental health stuff in there, when you think about say EAP programs or workplace, well-being programs. But when you think about all the different ways in which psychology might affect people in the workplace, it has to do with culture, it has to do with teamwork, it has to do with leadership. It has to do with learning and training. So how do people, capabilities, skill sets. So selecting and assessing for capabilities, developing capabilities. Um, Also to do with increasing productivity or managing productivity. So there's performance management stuff in there as well. But there's also a branch of org psych called human factors, which is mainly to do with how humans interact with their environments. More, in some cases, more specifically, how do humans interact with technology? So at the moment, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. So there's a lot of user experience research stuff in there as well. But it's quite a diverse discipline. People choose to specialize in different things. Um, Quite a few of them go on to be management consultants, do sort of project-based work. Um, but there are org psychs that sort of work in house across a variety of teams. So there is some overlap with HR functions.
Right.
So there's stuff like talent management in there as well. But
Yeah, I was going to ask because it sounds like some of the stuff you were describing there would fit within your typical HR department.
yeah. So look, there's a lot of people from HR backgrounds that just sort of wind up in the field of org psych and vice
Mm,
versa. Some people choose to, I guess, be generalists and work across, a variety of different areas. And, some people sort of find their calling within different niches. So, there are org psychs out there that might choose to specialize in cultural change or change management.
mm,
Again, other ones specializing in human factors, other ones specializing in EAP, mental health and workplace wellbeing
mm.
programs. So there's a lot of different directions that it can go. Um, you know, it's HR. If we were to draw a Venn diagram between HR and org psych, there would be a significant overlap.
Yep.
Say HR is probably more responsible for sort of the ongoing, management
Mm,
of these, organizational functions. But in terms of getting them up off the ground, and sort of, laying the groundwork and doing the research and doing that preliminary analysis stuff, that's kind of where org psychs come in. So,
right. Because I had an interesting conversation with someone the other day, and they said that they had recently been put through psychosocial training at work
okay.
because there was a change in the work health safety legislation
Yes.
to bring in psychological hazards as an actual risk and a hazard that needs to be considered under your work health safety plans for a workplace. No longer is it just, I guess, limited, let's say, to physical hazards and risks, but like psychological hazards and risks are identifiable and regulated
Yeah,
under national legislation now.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So this is a relatively recent change to
mm,
legislation. So yeah,
so I heard,
when
yeah,
we think about work health and safety, typically thinking about sort of the environment and making sure that the environments are safe and
yeah,
people are sort of doing the safe practices to prevent physical kinds of injury. But the major kind of change is that there's been enough evidence for us to actually point to the tangible risks associated with psychosocial hazards. So when we think about psychosocial hazards, some of the things that come to mind are like job fatigue, workload management,
mm,
lack of autonomy, poorly communicated change.
mm,
So when people are in situations where there's like role ambiguity, all these things, can contribute to a person's can wind up having a negative impact on a person's well-being.
mm,
We're now in a place where we can actually like tangibly measure that negative impact on a person's well-being. And because there's enough evidence behind it, we're now in a position where we can actually hold employers responsible for this stuff. So
mm,
if you're bringing in a whole bunch of stuff, or you're just piling on work to someone, and they wind up having a burnout or something like that. It's in the past we wouldn't have been able to point to this stuff,
mm,
or employers are responsible for it. So now, those standards have come in. In terms of it being enforceable by legislation, um, look, how it was explained to me is that, um, you know, it's not so much a law that people need to abide by, but the standard has been set.
mm,
And like with any of the other standards, if someone wants to claim that that they've been accredited as abiding by their standard, um, theoretically that should mean people should gravitate to that employer. So that starts to become the standard for we know that this is someone who manages psychosocial hazards well, so this is a safe place to work. So
yeah,
if
yeah,
I'm option between two jobs, all other things being equal, I should be going for the place that's safe for me to work.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, very interesting because yeah, it sounded like the emphasis in this workplace for this particular person was on that because they were in an office environment themselves. And so, apart from the usual slips and trips and like, did you put that box on the table correctly and it doesn't fall on someone's foot and hurt them? Like, I think this office situation is actually much more prone or higher risk for this level of psychosocial hazard than potentially some other more physical activities because these people are working in an office for environment. They seem to be dealing with KPIs and
Yeah,
intensive workloads and things like that, and things which were usually just expectations, it would have seemed in the past, can now be interpreted as, yeah, like you said, burnout, overloading people with work, not communicating change well, so they don't know what's really going on, and all of these factors would result in harm to their
yeah,
to their harm to their well-being generally.
absolutely.
um yeah, so it's interesting, and they did say that there was some type of regulatory change going on in the background to be able to have organizations investigated and being given orders to improve and notices to improve, and then outside of that there are fines and penalties for organizations and individuals if they
So,
don't uphold certain things.
yeah. So I think that's the direction that we're headed in. I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of
Mm,
being able to point like this stuff still sort of happens on a case by case basis. But
mm,
in terms of that broader legislation that obliges people to manage change well or manage people's
mm,
work really well, um, we're still in the process of bringing that to fruition. Because again, I mean, this stuff is really hard to pin down. Like we're trying to measure stuff that really does sit in the gray area.
yeah.
So again, this is where org psychs come in, because we kind of live in that grey area really of trying to figure out what's actually going on, and find a way to put metrics on stuff that might otherwise be really difficult to and kind of intangible.
So you said something earlier about human factors, and that's the relationship between people and technology. Is that?
So the broader discipline of human factors is how humans interact with their environment. So stuff like office design, ergonomics, human factors as well. So people's sort of work setups and that sort of thing. But yeah, more broadly, how can we design environments which are most useful to humans or maximize productivity? Technology does sort of sit within that realm, but again, it's a subset of human factors. But user experience research is I've noticed is particularly within the tech space is really starting to take off as something that's valuable, because for the longest time we've had people sort of designing software or designing technology or various types of instruments without a real understanding of what user needs are. So this is where you sort of get your stereotypes of someone, a software engineer who might be really good at coding, but when it comes to actually using a program, they've got a completely different level of knowledge about the ins and outs of how something works. So it starts to get difficult for people to actually connect with, hey, I'm average Joe, I'm trying to use Microsoft Word or something, how to make this easier for me to use. So try to bring stuff to, what do we understand intuitively? What have people gotten used to using? Or what other sort of schemas and frameworks do they have in place to be able to navigate technology? How well does that stuff, whatever we're designing, map onto what people already know about technology? So so there's some detailed stuff happening in that space. So some of the cooler tools they get to play with are like they've got these eye tracking goggles. So if you're staring at a computer screen, these things measure how long you spend staring at any one individual thing on the computer screen. So they can start to work out from there, which part of the interface is clunky, what do we need to make bigger, what do we need to make smaller, how does it all fit together, is the information that I need readily available when I need it, is the stuff that I don't use that often kind of off to the side, So
so you'd have like what, an organizational psychologist working with a software engineer to better enhance these type of technologies for that user experience?
So look, how it works is Psych sits across a number of different disciplines, but there are a number of people already in these disciplines that aren't necessarily Psychs. So there's a whole bunch of user experience researchers that might come from other backgrounds, but they might not necessarily be Psychs. So this just happens to be, I guess, the combination of those skill sets that sort of sits across a whole bunch of different fields. But sorry, I didn't answer your question. What was your question?
No, I was just wondering if it was Psych sitting with some type of, like a computer engineer or someone who's developing software for an actual end user. Is it like if you're scanning the screen and you can tell where their eyes are at, is that an Psych that's, using that technology to kind of enhance for the engineer and say, look, you should be focusing on this, you should be improving this part of your product. But like I think you mentioned, there could be people from a number of backgrounds potentially.
So like typically how that user experience research is conducted is your developers will produce say a couple product or testing it. So that's when you bring a UX researcher in, and sometimes they might be involved in the design of it if you've got a similar product or something else, but they'll start to collect consumer feedback on it. So they might start running surveys, they might do sort of observations of people interacting with the system. There might be a variety of ways in which they collect data. One of the more interesting methods of data collection is what they call a like talk out loud process. So someone might be interacting with the system, But while they're doing it, they're describing their thought process, and then someone documents it back
Right.
in real
Right.
time.
So when like your
Which,
computer crashes at work and you've just lost like a report and something and someone screams out a profanity, that's
yeah,
like
yeah, I
that's a
mean
form of,
that
yeah.
could be part of it. Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
but the idea behind it is that if you're trying to figure out what was going through a person's head when they clicked on this button or
Mm,
when they do this, so they,
yeah.
they, they literally describe the
Please.
process here. They'll be like, okay, I'm looking for this button. I'm clicking on this button.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Right.
looking for this menu item. I'll click on
Hmm.
this menu item, which can
Yeah.
wind up you're interfering with their experience of using it as well. So it's not a
Yeah.
perfect method of data collection because
Mm,
you're still not getting a naturalistic experience.
yeah. Yeah.
There's limitations
Yeah.
to any kind of collection.
Interesting. It sounds like how some people might interact with their IT department when they're trying to get something fixed. All right, I'm clicking on the button. It's not working.
Yeah,
Look, Boreas, I will let you like grill Kareem. I just want to ask one more
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm being selfish, but I really want to get this one out. Um, you mentioned, yeah, so organizational psychology, very, very kind of broad, kind of ranging area of expertise, many applications, many things to consider. I want to take it back to, I'm not sure if you're familiar at all with the work of Karl Marx and maybe even earlier political economists and just general philosophers and stuff of the time. But one of the large concerns that I think people had at the turn of the Industrial Revolution and even before that, when capitalism was really becoming a force to be reckoned with, was the capitalism forced or made further developed the idea of wage labor. And wage labor is different to other economic modes of production in the sense that, well, you get paid for your work, and that's the trade-off, right? So you come here, you work 10 hours a day, you get the money kind of thing. But everything, the means of production, the end product, everything is owned by capitals or owned by a private entity. And so like there's this idea called alienation, which is this huge undercurrent in the capitalist mode of production and society that kind of rules everything. And it's this idea that people are completely alienated from their work or the products and the fruits of their labor because of the capitalist kind of mode of economy, which is like you get paid to do a certain thing and like you pour your heart and soul into something potentially for your employer. And at the end of the day, even if it's like your best work or even if it's not, I guess it doesn't really matter. You have no ownership over that. You have no autonomy in the process. You're paid the wage, so you know just detach yourself from it. And that idea of alienation is completely soul destroying and crushing for humans who are, let's just say, like for argument's sake, naturally creative beings and get a lot of joy and satisfaction in life, just generally, from the idea that we create and like we kind of pour our effort into certain things, and to have to just detach ourselves from that at a certain point in the process, or just know like in the back of your mind that like you know all this hard work that you're doing, everything I guess that you're putting your effort into can arbitrarily just be taken off you at the drop of a hat, or it belongs to someone else, is, yeah, like I said, it's soul destroying, and it's the reason why there's I guess a lot of social anxiety in the world today. That would be something that these original political economists and Marxists and all that sort of stuff would argue. Have you ever heard of the phrase alienation like in this kind of context?
yeah. Look, I can't say I'm specifically familiar with the term, but yeah, I sort of understand the direction of thinking. I think
Hmm.
the part of it that jumps out at me is to what extent do we value meaning and purpose in our
Hmm.
work, and I guess um, for a lot of people, having meaning and purpose in your work and feeling like you're making a contribution to society is becomes a source of identity. I think that in
Mm.
terms of the work that we do and the amount of time that we spend at work, not uncommon for most people to wind up, forming a huge part of their identity from, the type of work that they do or whatever
Right.
that they're in. So I guess, in those situations where a person is detached from the end product or whatever contribution that they're making, it becomes less of an incentive to stay at work. Now that they're Look, that being said, I mean, there are multiple motivations for people choosing to work, and in some cases, that motivation might be strictly financial. So some people will literally go for the highest paying job, and tell themselves that I'm perfectly content with finding meaning and purpose outside of my work. That might be in a family pursuit, that might be in extracurricular activity. So someone might have sort of creative endeavors on the side, and in the mind of that person, they're saying to themselves, I work hard, I earn a living so that I get to do what I want outside of work. Now, I know I've met many people. By the way, I don't have any evidence to back any of this up. So I'm just speaking off the cuff.
We won't hold you to account for it.
I know for me, I'm not that type of person. I know that for me, I need to have meaning in my work, and that if I am detached from that, I will lose interest in my work altogether. So that's kind of how I've wound up where I'm at. That being said, I guess the other thing that sort of jumps out at me when you talk about that alienation is a sense of ownership over the end product. But I would argue that in any type of organization in which it takes more than one person to contribute to that end product, that to some extent that there has to be a level of cooperation and teamwork in order to actually arrive at that final goal. And in order to achieve that level of cooperation, you have to get everyone on the same page, which might involve people sort of sacrificing their individual interests in favor of the greater good. So it's we understand intuitively that we're capable of more as a group than we are as individuals. What we don't understand intuitively is how to work together. It is actually incredibly difficult to get everyone thinking on the same page and everyone pulling in the same direction. And when you realize what kind of diversity and variation there are in levels of cooperation between teams, this is part of what makes my work so fascinating is trying to figure out, okay, what are the factors that actually affect how well people work together? To what extent does communication contribute to that? To what extent does leadership contribute to that? Is it a function of the environments that people are working in? Are they under-resourced? For some people, that sense of meaning and purpose, and I guess that the opposite of alienation to me would be a sense of autonomy in your role. So in organizations where roles have low levels of autonomy, and again, it really depends on what kind of role it is as well. But where people are sort of in their careers, because if I'm fresh out of uni and sort of working in a job, it's probably not the best idea to give me a whole lot of autonomy in my job. I'm going to need a fair bit of guidance and direction. But as people start to develop capabilities and confidence in their work, they tend to prefer having a little bit more autonomy in their work. Getting a chance to excel and sort of really demonstrate what their capabilities are. And I think a lot of people derive meaning and purpose in that sense of ownership that they're describing from that having that just get out of my way and watch me work. Don't be so hands on. You hear a whole bunch of people saying, I don't respond well to micromanagement. Particularly people that have been in their jobs for really long times. But this is where that whole leadership piece comes into it, because there's a variety of theories on leadership. But I'm familiar with one type of theory that talks about situational leadership. I think it's situational leadership, but anyway, don't quote me on it. This idea that the different different members of your team are going to need different leadership styles. So, I described that fresh uni graduate is going to need a fair bit of guidance.
Yeah.
And I talked about, someone who's far more experienced is probably looking for that next opportunity and wants to be given a bit more responsibility. Leaders are going to have to adapt to those two team members in different ways. But I think that, most leaders, if you ask them what's your leadership style, they'll give you a static response. So it's merely acknowledging that you might have to change your style depending on what the situation is.
Yes.
Is a concept that potentially foreign to a lot of leaders.
But I would say that that is a form of cooperation in itself, like knowing how to interact with someone, even if you're leading them, let's say, being able to interact with them appropriately to get the job done. You might have to make some compromises as a leader in order to get them functioning at the most efficient level for the organization's needs, for the business needs, for your own team's sake, or just to deliver whatever you're trying to deliver. But I think the essence of the capitalist mode of production, which was this idea that you get paid a set wage for your time kind of thing, and like whatever decisions you make, everything is ultimately at the whim of like a board of directors, or an owner of a certain organization has like ultimate control and executive power in that situation. It's the thing that alienates not just the workforce in itself, but members of society generally, because they're detached from everything that they are producing. Like I know people can have like side hustles and kind of have hobbies on the outside, but if they spend most of their, I guess, productive life working for somebody else and producing for somebody else, and they might not get as much time to produce the things that they want to do, or just live the style or the lifestyle they want to do, because they have to trade their time for a wage to survive in this type of society. That ultimate form of being alienated from what you're doing, or your ultimate life purpose, or things like that, is not just soul destroying for the individual, but for many individuals across the society, and then has larger and broader implications. But I want to take it back to something that you said about cooperation, though, and cooperation kind of requires, I guess, or it's very difficult, and like humans might not naturally be able to work together, or they might not do that very easily. Um, but there is a sense of like self-satisfaction or liberation, I would say, in cooperation, in the sense that even if you have to give up ownership or autonomy to work with other people, the fact that you have to be selfless sometimes and give up what you think is a better idea to someone else, you get a level of satisfaction out of that that you wouldn't, being directed to do something just because you're told to do so by the fact that you're in a hierarchical organization, and somebody has the power at any time to say, you stop what you're doing and go do something else, kind of thing. And you have to kind of pick up and just drop what you're doing and move as the direction kind of pulls you around. But like I was wondering actually to see if that idea, that kind of Marxist idea, or that philosophical notion that is discussed quite a lot. I think even Adam Smith talks about alienation to a certain extent. If it's something that is actually taught to organizational psychologists, or it's like, oh yeah, we talk about that sort of stuff all the time.
It's not something that sort of like made its way into my studies, but look, I mean, it is, like individual worker well-being is something that's definitely on our radars. And insofar as that contributes to individual, worker well-being, that absolutely is within our remit. Might just backtrack a little bit, because I'd hate to give this impression that humans are kind of fundamentally selfish and unable to work with other people. I'm just conscious that I might have given that impression before. So when I say it's incredibly difficult to get people working on the same page, what I really mean is to get people aware of how many different factors actually influence our ability to work with each other.
Mm,
I
mm,
wholeheartedly agree with you around this idea that we do get some intrinsic sense of satisfaction of being part of the greater, and having that greater sort of accomplish whatever task or it was that they set out to achieve. There absolutely is a sense of satisfaction and camaraderie and
mhm,
teamwork. So these things definitely do exist. I guess the degree to which a person is willing to sacrifice their own self-interest for whatever team they're going to be a part of differs between individuals. So,
Yeah.
if you've got a collection of individuals that are willing to sacrifice to different degrees, um, you might not even get agreement on you know
mm,
how much I need to how much autonomy I might be willing to give up in this decision, or how much I'm willing to defer to leadership on
mm.
whatever it is that we're working on. So look, it's a bit of a tricky one, but I think that look, you know,
No, I'm glad that you've
Yeah.
clarified that for me, because like I did want, and like naturally, I just want to be reassured that humans do have an element of cooperation that's inbuilt with them as social creatures. And like I would like to actually say then, by extension from what we're talking about, if it's a factor in the workplace that people find it hard to work together, I would say that's an inherent feature of the capitalist environment itself, and not an innate feature of like human nature. It is a
human, yeah,
product of this thing that I'm talking about, which is
yeah,
alienation.
the
And
ways in which we're organized, yeah. So
yeah,
I think one of the things which is sort of headed in a more positive direction, and I think that in a lot of ways COVID is directly responsible for this
mm,
is um, you know I think organizations are starting to understand that um, happier workers are more productive workers.
mm,
Mm.
So, at the end of the day, if I'm sitting there trying to maximize productivity, or I'm trying to maximize sales or revenue or whatever it is, um, the situations in which my workers are well looked after is ultimately going to benefit my bottom line. So I think that's really something that's really starting to show up. It's not a it's not a binary decision that I need to make anymore around, am I chasing profit or am I going to look after my team?
mm.
In the end, those two goals wind up being,
They-
compatible. So
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that, when we talk of apparently this phenomenon wasn't as present in Australia, but I'm not sure if you guys heard about the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yep.
so this idea that people, once they found themselves spending a whole lot more time at home, really started to reevaluate their lives around what's important to me. Where does this slavish loyalty to my employer come from? If I'm in a
Thank you for
position
using the word
where
slavish, by the way. I really like that.
yeah, just throw that in there to make you guys happy. But yeah, this idea that look, you know, if and again, I'm aware that this isn't a phenomenon that's sort of cuts across classes, because a lot of people aren't in a position to be able to choose their work, or have the freedom
Mm,
to be able to do that. There's limited opportunities
mm,
in some areas and socioeconomic classes. That's an unfortunate reality of our world. But the people that were in a position to be able to say, okay, do I want to spend more time at home? Do I need more flexibility in my working arrangements? Started to become more demanding of their employers and say, listen, these are the conditions under which I'm willing to work.
Mm.
And a byproduct of that was then employers realized, hang on, we've actually got to compete for talent now. If we
yeah.
want good
Yeah.
workers, we have to start providing adequate working conditions. Otherwise, people are just not going to want to work for us. So, quite often, like, I mean, flexible working and work from home arrangements, rewind 4 years ago, that stuff was almost unheard of.
Yeah.
You like it definitely wasn't widespread or common, but now a
Mm,
lot of people are sort
Yeah.
of demanding it, that they will they will say no to a job offer who doesn't provide those flexible work arrangements. So
Yeah.
I think that, you know, prioritizing worker well-being is I guess a more positive consequence of you know, the post-COVID era. So again,
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from in terms of
Yeah.
the nation and you know, how this stuff has sort of made its way into our society, and I guess how that's a function of capitalist structure. But I genuinely feel like you know, the wheels are changing, moving on this one, and it's you know, it's headed in a more positive direction. So
And this may be a reflection of your job. I'm just kind of taking this in the totality of the last 10 minutes when you've been speaking. Because it seems like with your job, you seem to have been advocating for this much more blended work style for your fellow workers. So it seems like your job as an org psych, and you know, please let me know if I'm completely off on the wrong track. It seems like you're a mediator because I've just got this picture in my head that not only is the employer coming towards you guys and saying, oh, you know, how can I improve things for my employees? Can you tell me what to do in my policies and procedures from step 1 to 10 as to how to do that? But I wouldn't be surprised if a union rep also came to you and was like, hey, what are they doing wrong? Because it seems like you have to be that buffer between what the workers want and also what the employer wants. Like, am
yeah,
I on the wrong track or?
look, you've almost nailed it. You've
Okay,
almost nailed it.
okay.
Look, I have spent some time in management consulting, so you know, I am sort of you know, familiar with, you know, the conversations that take place in these environments. Look, it's not so much, you know, union reps that might be approaching us, but let's say you know, I get tasked with a project to accomplish, you know, cultural change. You know, the first step in any project is usually you want to go out, get a feel for an organization, you know, talk to the people that are involved in it, you know, do um, you know, that stakeholder, you know, analysis and management stuff. And you know, one of my things is you know, I'm quite big on you know, boots on the ground. You know,
Mm,
so you know, on one level, yeah, I need to understand, you know, what leadership is trying to accomplish, but on another level, I need to know, you know, what the front line is experiencing and what sort of
mm.
challenges and you know, how these policies and procedures are getting filtered down to the people that are actually, you know, on the coal face. You know, so
Thank you
in
for
any
using that phrase.
yeah. Just throwing a whole bunch of bones here, eh? Um, so I'm quite insistent on sort of you know, speaking with people, doing interviews, doing focus groups, getting a thorough understanding of what's actually going on for them. You know, and by the time I'm speaking with these people, I'm starting to get a feel for what is the mismatch between the experience that's actually happening versus the experience that, you know, the leaders think are happening. And by the time they've engaged a consultant, you know, to try to accomplish organizational change, on some level they know something's wrong,
Mm,
or on some level they've you know, they've started to get a feel that, hey, you know, this might not be headed in the direction that they want. Again, that's my experience. That might not be across the board. There might be some really proactive organizations out there that don't wait that long.
mm,
But you know, I see my role in those situations as you know, if I'm collecting data, if I'm interviewing people, if I'm getting an understanding of what is actually going on in this organization, I see it as my responsibility to, you know, to accurately represent the voice of, you know, the people that are actually experiencing the struggle. Um, that being said, it can wind up being, you know, a bit of uh, a delicate situation. Let's say it's a small organization, and you know, if you know, if I'm collecting comments, or if I'm, you know, if I'm trying to make a particular point, you know, but if I wind up being too detailed in what was described to me, leadership may immediately know who said what.
right.
Yeah.
I have to
Yeah.
protect the confidentiality of the employees because, otherwise I'm not going to get accurate data. I'm not going to get an understanding of what's going on unless I assure them of anonymity and confidentiality.
Mm.
So it does wind up being like walking a bit of a tightrope. And at the same time, having those conversations with leadership can be delicate as well. Not everyone responds positively to being told that there's a variety of things wrong with their organization. Some people
Yeah.
as a personal attack. So again, that's just the reality of the space that I work in is that you have to get really good at having those conversations. But still, so when you describe my role as being like a mediator between leadership and employees at the end of the day. Yes, you're right to some extent, which does place us in some incredibly sticky situations. So,
So can I just ask quickly, our job here at the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast is to ignite revolution. And I guess you could say that revolution is the ultimate cultural change within society as opposed to just the workplace. What strategies do you have as an org psych when a company comes to you and says, well, we've got a cultural problem here? How do you just very quickly, how do you bring about cultural change in an organization?
look, there's
Is there a
yeah,
playbook for that?
man,
Or
there are so many different theories around how to approach cultural change because it's such a diverse topic. I could do
it
a whole
sounds like
podcast on that.
revolution, very diverse topic too.
Um, yeah, it's this like you've asked $1 million question, but it's an incredibly complicated answer. So,
Mm,
look, I think the first place to start is by sort of getting an understanding of what culture actually is. Because
mm,
on the one level you've got your policies and procedures. You've got your KPIs. You've got what's actually documented as what we're supposed to do.
mm,
But culture is in a lot of ways the stuff that sits under that has been the unspoken way that we do things around here,
yep.
way that we carry ourselves, the way that we communicate, the language that we use, the artifacts, the symbols, the representations. So culture is really this all-encompassing thing
Mm,
that's quite difficult to pin down. That's quite difficult to measure, let
yeah.
alone even diagnose, let
Mm,
alone change.
yeah.
So when you understand how nebulous a concept you're working with in terms of accomplishing cultural change, like
Mm,
in terms of even trying to define
mm,
culture, and quite often you'll ask people, um, like how would you describe your culture? And you'll just get these really cookie cutter kind of answers like, yeah, this is a fun place to work, like yeah, we get along with each other. None of that stuff really tells me anything about anything. So
yeah.
it's yeah, putting your finger on that stuff to begin with
Mm,
is part of the challenge.
mm,
So I guess trying to identify the ways in which people interact with each other. I think
yep.
one of the other sorts of ways that I try to think about is not necessarily what behaviors are rewarded or punished, but what behaviors might be frowned upon or what behaviors might be looked upon favorably. So, if you start to say, take a look at who gets promotions and who doesn't, it might not necessarily be your highest performers that get promotions in an organization. It might be the ones that do sort of, communicate in a certain way or have a certain attitude so this is where we start to get into the real
Mm,
nuance of
mm. Sorry, the
yeah,
correlations of what you're talking about here with how society actually is working is just incredible.
yeah,
People getting promoted in society who don't actually deserve it, but they keep climbing up the social ladder and all that sort of stuff. This is just amazing. And there's certain framework that sits over the top of society. This is how it works on the surface, policies, regulations, rules, all that sort of stuff. But then the unspoken level of culture that this is how shit really gets done, kind of thing. You know, this is the actual culture sitting
yeah,
underneath all of the official stuff. The correlations are incredible.
yeah.
So, but like
Right,
what I'm hearing is there is no silver bullet,
Mm.
but you have to have an understanding of what's going on before you can do anything.
yeah, yeah. So, but look, I mean, this is probably a really primitive way of thinking about it, and it is much more complicated than this. But you know, you could typically understand, at least a significant chunk of what's going on by having a look at the carrots and the sticks.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
Mm.
what behaviors are getting reinforced
Yep.
uh, positively, or what behaviors are being punished.
Yeah.
So if we start to get a feel for what does it take to get ahead, or what's going to set me back, um, particularly when you think about social structures, and it's again just as true in organizations that you know there's this added element of pride, or maybe a magnified sense of shame if your behaviors are on show, and whatever you're being rewarded or punished for is made public, basically, in full view of your colleagues. Um, it can have this compounding effect. Whereas, let's say, if you're an individual trying to reward or punish yourself, might not have that same sense of magnitude, because it's not on show for the entire world to see. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, but this is how you wind up with stuff like people who work themselves into the ground,
Mm.
who neglect their families, or pump in like 14-hour days or something, who start getting promotions. This
Yeah.
is how that stuff winds up actually getting ingrained into cultures, because
Mm.
like the remainder of the workforce will see that and be like, oh, so that's what it takes to get ahead. Okay,
Mm.
Yeah.
and some people will be like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm getting out of here. Others will be like, I want to get promoted.
Mm.
This is how I advance in life. There's no other
Yeah.
way. So, yeah, the effect of I guess witnessing um, what gets rewarded or punished in other people can wind up having a huge influence over us.
Mm. Mm.
Okay, I think at this stage I kind of want to shift gears where taking off your org psych hat and putting on
Yeah,
your student hat,
yeah,
because we've had some very interesting conversations about your projects on AI and Chat GPT.
yeah,
So was wondering if you could tell the listeners a bit about that, because you've been doing some very interesting work in that regard.
yeah, yeah. So I guess I don't know, where do I start with that? All right, maybe I'll just sort of start talking about why I'm obsessed with AI.
Yeah.
Of what sort of
Please.
down this route. So I guess, yeah, I talked before about sort of playing in that gray space of what we can actually measure, what we can pin down, and yeah, a lot of what I do is focused around data collection.
Mm.
Putting that research hat on and trying to get a thorough understanding of something in a way that I can actually build evidence to make a case for something. Like if we need
Mm.
to change something, I've got to go out and be able to find a way to actually prove it, essentially. Um, Now, somewhere along the line, I guess I stumbled across the concepts of machine learning algorithms and predictions, and just how these things are kind of put together. And I started to um, be familiar with some of the concepts that were going into it, like around the statistical side of things. So things like regression in terms of making predictions. So I won't go too far down the rabbit hole with this stuff, but
Mm.
anyway, I figured out the way these things are kind of constructed is not sort of completely out of my realm. But I started to get fascinated about what the possibilities were. And I guess the way I saw it was, typically if I go into a research project, um, there's a period in which we're collecting data, and then it's kind of over. It's like, okay, I'll go talk to 30 people, and then that's it. It's finished, and I've got to work with whatever data I've got and draw whatever conclusions I want from that. And my understanding, and again, I'm still in the infancy of my understanding, so huge disclaimer across this stuff. Not an expert in machine learning or anything, but my understanding of how these things come together is that they continue to acquire data, so that the predictions that they're making become more and more refined and more accurate. So as these machine learning algorithms I look at them like living research projects, basically. So some of them will sort of cap how much data they collect before they start to implement whatever's going on with them. But quite often they'll just continue to get better and better at whatever it is they're doing, and in a lot of cases, the accuracy of their predictions when compared to their human counterparts eventually reaches a stage where they get better at doing stuff that humans can do. So, say for example, there are algorithms that that run on medical imaging, which can get better at sort of diagnosing cancer or picking up certain types of abnormalities that that might be not as accessible to trained medical professionals. So
Right. So if you feed them enough imagery, and like give them initially the concept of what is something to look out for, they can scan across enough of a body of information to get better at looking out for that indication. And then they can get so good at it that they can get better than a keen and trained human eye.
Yeah. So, and that's just a function of how much data they collect, really. So, again, that's one application of machine. That's not the entirety of what it is, and I'd hate to misrepresent that either. But
no,
I guess my sort of broader fascination, with it, revolved around this idea of like what could AI learn that humans have not yet learned? What is going to be the capability of AI, in terms of, I think, the things that were quite influential on me were, when I started looking at documentaries around, say, when Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov, I think it was in 1997, or when AlphaGo was created recently and beat I forget what his name was, but these programs are starting to become capable of a level of creativity, based on what they're learning. That's giving them access to type of thinking that might be beyond us. So rather than I get that there's a lot of fear around these things in terms of will they replace humans, will they take out jobs, will they become super intelligent and lead us in the dust. But the most fascinating question for me is, what will they learn that we haven't? What can we learn from them? How can we use that to improve our lives? So, when I think about what the possibilities of AI are, so at the moment I'm doing my thesis on using ChatGPT for retirement planning. And basically what I'm in the process of doing is trying to find a way to measure the value of a conversation with ChatGPT that's been pre-programmed with certain questions to facilitate a conversation around retirement planning. But ChatGPT is what we call a generative AI. It's been trained on really large, diverse set of information. I think what makes it essentially different from what's come before it is this idea of RLFH, so RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. So what that means is ChatGPT will generate a response, and then there's a human on the other end of that who's basically giving a tick or a cross around, was this a good response or was this not a good response? So that's the data that it acquires over time. Do that 1,000,000 times and it starts to figure out what's a good response and what's not a good response, and it gets really good at giving you a good response. So, there's no sort of end to that process. It will continue to refine its capabilities until
Mm.
it's really, really good at conversation.
So
Um,
hypothetically, if you were to unleash, let's say, ChatGPT, and open it up to the public for them to use and muck around with,
yeah,
then like you just have like millions of people across the planet that are just teaching this thing to be better at conversation and natural language conversation because it
so
has to deal with a broad range of different language types and nuances and colloquialisms and all that type of stuff, right?
yeah, so that evaluation's happened before it's already gone live. The model that they released has already gone through this cycle.
Hmm.
Like, well, I asked ChatGPT, how much feedback it had received. Wouldn't give me a solid answer on it. Uh, but it just
Hmm.
said large scale evaluation of
Hmm.
these responses.
But like,
Um,
so you don't think it's getting any benefit, ChatGPT, from being released to the public and being used by millions of
yeah,
people?
yeah. So if you look at the thumbs up, thumbs down on each
Yeah,
answer that it
yeah,
generates, that's part of reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's it continuing to acquire information on did I do a good job or not?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Give me
and
feedback. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and I guess the way that sort of maps onto um, humans is that this idea of conditioning again, going back to the carrots and the sticks. Um,
Hmm.
Yeah,
it sounds really absurd that we're using carrots and sticks with a computer,
yeah,
um, but it's an incredibly effective way of learning.
yeah.
So yeah, it's I don't know. For me, I just see endless possibilities with this technology. So it's absolutely fascinating to me, what the capabilities are. But I think that um, as a generative AI, one of the things that you talked about before was humans having an intrinsic sort of desire to create and to be creative. Now, within our society, we have I believe creativity is something that is intrinsic to all of us. But the reality is some people are better at expressing it than others.
Hmm.
Like we have artists. Not everyone can do what artists and musicians
Yep.
and poets can do. Um, but I look at AI, in terms of it being a source of creativity as being a potential, leveling of the playing field,
Yeah.
giving creativity to people who might have otherwise struggled to express their ideas,
Yeah.
or might have been looking for, um, I don't know, even in terms of if I were to bring that into, I guess, um, if I were to put that outside perspective on it again, like if people are say in marketing roles or any kind of roles which might sort of require content generation, you're going to find people that are better than that than others.
Yep.
Um, but having access to an AI in that space um, has the opportunity to level the playing field for that.
Mm.
For people working in that space, as the potential. I don't think AI is ever sort of going to fully replace individuals in that space, but I do
Mm.
think it's going to lead to significant efficiencies.
Mm.
Um, that free up people to do other things with their time. Whether or not that's work related, I'm not entirely sure. But
Mm.
it's an amazing age that we're stepping in. So,
There's this big feature, and I'm sorry to have to bring it back to this again, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's a big feature in Marx's analysis of capitalism, and it's like the displacing effect of technology. And like capitalism is one of the defining features of capitalism compared to other modes of production, is that it requires and it lives off and breeds technological change. It's inherent in the capitalist system, like technological innovation in a um, coercively competitive environment breeds like, okay, I got the edge on this person because I can produce this thing a little bit better or cheaper or like more efficiently, and so that they can make a little bit more capital and then reinvest that. And like there's this constant like battle over technological prowess. But like at each point where technology steps into a new realm, you have this massive displacement of sections of the working class.
Mm.
And like this is just an inherent feature of capitalism. And so like it's interesting when you talk about like people being scared of AI because like they think it's going to take my job or something like that, and like or you know displace humans almost entirely. Um, it would seem that this is just another one of those technological advances almost that just has the power to, while you could say it would be displacing a large amount of the workforce, it would be also conversely, you could look at it and say it's liberating a large section of humanity slash a workforce from having to do menial tasks or tasks that can be done like by a tool to make your life easier. And yes, it's displacing it, and it might knock a few people out. But if it levels out a playing field, like what you're saying, or if it makes a certain job kind of redundant now because it can be done in a better and more efficient way, it might free people up for other things, and might even free people up for more humanly pursuits, doing things that, you know, humans find interest in, as opposed to some machine that's just like rote learning kind of thing. So I have to agree with you there, that I don't see it as scary, and I see it as a tool, and almost a liberating one, to be honest. Because like when we get these things that are supposed to make people's lives easier, technically, um, it potentially can raise the living standard for a large section of society, or even for society as a whole, because people get the opportunity to potentially do something else.
Yeah. So look, I'll speak to that, and then I'll probably go off on a tangent if you guys will let me. But
Please.
yeah. So look, yeah, wholeheartedly agree with you on that one. I guess yeah, for me, it's sort of the key piece of the puzzle is when these technologies get introduced, there needs to be a corresponding evolution of our capabilities, of our skill sets in terms of working with these technologies. So,
Mm,
if you know, well, I mean, to date, we've probably got a whole bunch of jobs that have been replaced, through technology. Um, but that being said, the people who know how to work with the technology, um, still have jobs and have had to figure out how to use the technology to make the most of it. In terms of the total number of jobs that are available, or what sort of workload there is to divide up amongst people, that's up for contention. So
mm,
if a job that took 100 people in the past now takes 10 people, is that a net positive effect on society or not? Look,
mm,
I'll leave it to people much smarter than me to sort of debate that. But look, again, I see, wherever there is an opportunity for for the evolution of our individual skill sets, of our individual capabilities, that the more that we can sort of learn to diversify that, and learn to sort of invest in our own education, invest in our own learning and training. Again, I'd be naive to assume that that's going to be the case, for everyone, or that everyone has, equal access to education, and those kind of training opportunities. But for me, the success of these new technologies, in terms of liberating the workforce, really depends on how good we get at using them, how good
mm,
we get at being able to upskill ourselves. If there are sort of cost savings or efficiencies to be had, or more time on our hands, all of that is really going to be dependent on how good do we get at actually being able to use AI to do the stuff that
mm,
we might not want to do. So, again, I'd argue the stuff like relationship management, um, in terms of, there's always going to be stuff that um, humans need to do.
Yeah.
You know, regardless of how good AI gets, and even if, you know, the window starts to get narrower in terms of the amount of stuff that humans need to do, the level at which we'll need to do it is going to start to get higher and higher.
Mm.
You know, what I mean by that is, you know, if you're a person who's tasked with relationship management, you're not having to fill in documents all day, or you know, do a whole bunch of paperwork. The expectation is going to be that you invest a whole lot more into that skill.
Yes.
You get good at communication, that you get good at rapport building, all those soft skills and things that go around that. And presumably, if you've got that much more opportunity to do it because you're not spending your time behind the computer, you know, writing marketing.
Gee.
Well, I keep shitting on marketing. That's really unfair. Just using it as an example, you know, all this paperwork to do that AI can do. The parts of your job that you might actually enjoy doing. You know, it's you know, my assumption is that there will be that greater level of investment in that kind of stuff. Now, the tangent that I wanted to go on was, you know, I have this thing, and this is, you know, very much a personal kind of thing around, you know, what I call a apocalyptic skill set. So this idea that, you know, if the world goes to shit, what do I actually bring to the table? Now, I was in banking for a really long time. And this is probably when I had that, you know, it's not that, you know, I'm expecting the world to end tomorrow, that we're going to have to run out with, you know, swords and fight for our food or anything. But, you know, I kept asking myself the question, you know, if, as a banker, what do I bring to the table? I have a lot of trouble justifying my value in an apocalyptic society.
Right. I like this. I like this question. It's good.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like on some level, you know, as society continues to evolve and we get access to more technologies, and you know, our standards of living improve, you know, we're getting more and more detached from what that apocalyptic skill set is. You know, can I grow food? Can I make stuff? Can I fix stuff? Can I, you know, you know, these are, mind you, I'm not very good at any of this stuff, by the way. So,
So note to self,
not
when the
yet
apocalypse comes.
good at making stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look, it's just, it's at least a consideration. Right? So what is that baseline of stuff that I'm supposed to be able to do? Um, you know, if we're stuck on a deserted island again, yeah, how am I going to justify my, you know, so do I at least bring something to the table? And I feel like, you know, if we don't get too far detached from that, it's just the starting point in not sort of, in terms of not letting technology completely take over our lives, or completely alter our way of living. Like, you know, at the very minimum, um, you know, in terms of looking after ourselves, you know, if I need to traverse terrain because cars stop working or something, you know, have I at least looked after my body well enough to, I don't know, go pick fruit from a tree, or like, you know, take a walk down the road or something like that. So I feel like appealing to that basic sense of humanity, and just bringing that evolutionary perspective on it helps keep me grounded. Because otherwise my head's stuck in the clouds all day when I play with robots. So
I do like that as a profession, though, playing with robots. I like that. I can get behind that.
well, yeah.
Okay, well, I feel like that was a good sentiment to end things on. And just to finish out, thank you, Kareem, for coming today, letting us interview you. Today's been very enlightening.
Yes.
Yes, enjoy it. Yeah, that's it's been a pleasure. And yeah, no, thanks heaps for having me on. So
Yes, and what's that synthwave art? So the final section, the prompt for today was psych in the environment, and it gave
Wow.
me
I was
that.
wondering what the prompt was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What,
Wow.
isn't that a really famous psych thing? The butterfly thing that's coming out of her face? Do you remember what that It's the picture, it's the blob picture that some people think that it's a butterfly or it's a tree, or I forget what it's specifically called. Um,
It's
I
not ringing a bell for me.
yeah.
Well, it looks cool, but yeah,
Mm.
We'll have to investigate that later. Anyway, guys, remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, Mr. E.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and thank you, Kareem, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.